This is an ADI node, which is the beating heart of the ADI framework. And if you've been following this series, it has many things that you have already been programming. Things like conditions, which apply dynamic programming in order to give our application context awareness and the ability to extend condition making to super users or power users. It also includes prompts, which allow us to query the user in order to add to our application's context awareness so that we can collect real-time data about what's actually happening. And finally, actions, which allow us to run any kind of code that is inside of our application. And also, it allows us to allow non-programming users to schedule those or insert those into logic sequences in order to facilitate knowledge harvesting. All of this logic is encapsulated within the ADI node, each of which contains a decision of true or false based on context-aware conditions, where that context awareness is provided through dynamic programming and use of the eval function, and when optionally extended to use weighting and other factors, can resemble a decision network or a Markov chain. This can be very useful for decision making, but for today we are going right to the basics and we're just doing simple application of decision network concepts to make our applications super powerful. I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie. Thank you for joining once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we go back to our application domain intelligence playlist with Microsoft Access, and we're going to take a look at programming nodes. Now, nodes really bring everything together. In our previous episodes, we created, conditions and prompts and actions and things like that. And nodes are where everything comes together, and we start specifying where the direction of decision making goes in each case that gets evaluated. So join me as today we create our very first nodes for our first context using some test data, and we're going to take a look at how this works. Let's get to it. Interested in more cool topics like these? Make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. Okay guys, so this is a super fun one today. This really brings everything together in our ADI framework here. And you can see I'm using the same file that we've been using all of this time. And we created our conditions in our second episode, prompts in the third episode. Our answers were part of the prompts. And then we did our actions in the fourth episode. And today is the fifth episode. We also have a log file there. And we have our candy table and a shift form, which are really just sort of sample, context tools for us that we are going to toss in the next few episodes and get onto a real database. But today we are using the simple examples. This is the code. If you hit Control-G on your keyboard, you can jump to the code, or you can double click on the ADI module there that we have, and you'll see this this module pop up, and you can see some of the functions that we created in our last episode there. But first, what we're going to do is we are going to create some tables, and we're going to need some tables. We're going to need one for nodes, and we are also going to need an additional table for node sets, I guess you'd call them. And so let's get to it. So we're starting a new table. We used the create ribbon there, and we just grabbed new table design, and there we go. We've got our field size is 255. I'll leave it at 255. That's my default, and that's going to allow us to put a nice long name in there if we need to describe a node perhaps, but that's the friendly a name that your super users are going to see when we start building forms on top of this, and that is super handy. And then our condition is going to be the condition from the condition ADI condition table, and you can see there that I went back and grabbed the actual field name, which is condition ID, which will be a foreign key onto the other table there. And so now we've got our condition ID, and then what we want to have, just like you saw in the example diagram at the start of this video, there is a pass node and a fail node, and depending on what happens with our condition, our logic will go one way or the other. So that's what we've got there, and then we'll right click on our node ID and make that our primary key, and we can hit save, and we'll save this as ADI_node, and that will give us our node table. And you can understand that this table can have, thousands and thousands of nodes in it, and they are related to each other. But what we want to do is we want to create a table that sort of signifies the starting points of all of our different, sets of nodes, because this is a very useful technology. And what we're going to do is we're going to enable ourselves to kick off different kinds of sets. So you might have, one that is on an after update of a particular price. And you might have another one that, looks for when certain things are sold to check and run batches about something else. And so what this allows you to do by having a ADI set table is that it's going to allow us to specify the starting points for, when we kick off a particular, sequence. Up until now, we've only looked at at first we looked at node 0, which is the test node. And now we've got a couple of nodes in our table there, but we haven't really said, this is where it starts. And that's really what this table is about. So we set our primary key on there. We've got ADI set for the name, and it's just going to specify the starting node for this set. And so you can have 1,000 different, contexts that you can use your, application domain intelligence. And that's really the key of it, is that you can start sprinkling this around your application, so that you can have very fine, recommendations to the user. It's very adaptive, and so when a particular chain starts, the ending might be changed by what it discovers, as it is processing the context awareness parts of it. So be aware of that. And so in our code here, we'll bring up that code window again, and we've got our function doNode, and we're going to specify the node that we're going to process. So now we're building a function just like we did for actions, where we had doAction and then we had doActions. We're also going to have a function for doNode. Now that's a little bit different because we're making it a function and not a subroutine. So that means we're going to return back a value at the end of this. And so processes a single node and returns to the next node. It returns the next node or the terminal node, and it might also, you might extend it, or we might extend it later to return other values like -2 for an error or something. But for now, what we'll do is we're just going to put in that terminal node is -1, and if it returns that, then the application knows to stop processing. And if it returns something other than -1, then it's going to process whatever that node is. And so this will depend on what logic comes out of our condition, and so we're going to program that now. So we're going to get our database just like we did in our other episodes there. We're going to populate a record set so we know what's going on. We're going to get that data. We're going to have a string for our SQL so that we can build, our selection from the database. And then we're going to have a node 2 as a long integer, and that's going to be the return after we process true or false on our condition. Which way is the next decision going to go? And so that's what we're going to do there. We'll get a condition, a long integer as well, because we are going to be evaluating a condition. Okay, so our select string here will be select star from ADI node, where the node ID is equal to the integer node that we passed into this procedure here. And then we'll set our record set equal to db.openRecordSet, and we're going to pass in that SQL string there, and then we're going to open a snapshot just like we did for the other ones that we programmed in this series. Snapshots are read-only, and so they also have a little bit better performance. And so snapshots are great for this purpose. We don't want to open a record set that we can update. So we're going to close our record set at the end of our function. We want to make sure that that record set gets closed so we don't leave it open. And so we're going to try to close it, and regardless of what happens, that's what that on error resume next means there. Regardless of what happens, we're going to try and close it. And so if it's not open and it gives an error, it's just going to ignore it. But if it is open, that record set's getting closed. Next, we are looking at our function error line label there, and that's going to be a jump point for if there is an error somehow. Maybe there's a network cable got disconnected or whatever, we don't know, runtime error. It's going to jump to this function error, and then it will give a message box giving you the error number and the error, and then it's going to resume at the line label called function exit. So it's going to jump back up there, and then it's still going to try and close that record set regardless of if there was an error or whatever. It's not going to leave those connections open, and so it's going to clean itself up nicely at the end there. So that gives us a nice scaffolding for this procedure. And what we'll do at the very end of our procedure, of course, is we're going to set our the value of our doNode function to the node2 long integer that we created, the variable. And so that's going to make sure that we have a value for our function, and at the very start of our procedure, we're going to set that to -1. And so that means it's initialized to -1, and then it's going to hold that value all the way through the function. So if anything happens, it's going to say stop. If there's something bad that happens, unless it gets a good result, goes through, gets the next node, then that's fine. But otherwise, it's going to return a -1, which will tell execution to stop. And so that long integer there, that is our gold. We are going to be passing that back so that the framework knows where to go next, depending on what happens in the next bit of logic here. And so we're also going to put our on error go to function error. We'll put that at the top of our procedure, and that's going to say, hey, you know what? If something happens here, it blows up or whatever, it's going to shoot our logic to that error function, and then that'll give a nice pop-up, and then allow everything to be closed afterward by resuming at function exit. Okay, let's get our condition. So our condition is going to be, now that we have our record set open, and we are making the assumption that there's no nulls in the condition field. So we're going to say our condition long integer is equal to the record set, the field called condition ID. And that is what we want to see there. So we're going to grab that condition ID out of the record set, and you can see in the drop down here, our condition is true function. This is the one we created in episode 2. Make sure you go back and watch that one if you haven't watched that one yet. But in that episode, we created the ability to evaluate a condition using dynamic programming, which is like super awesome. And allows you to have code outside of your VBA editor here, and so you can store that code in tables and have it executed as a condition, whether it's an expression or it's code or whatever, you can do that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use that function that we created, and we're just going to say if condition is true for the condition that we have received, the long integer, then do this stuff, otherwise do this other stuff. And that's what our if, then, else, and if means there. And so if that condition's true, depending on the condition we pass in, then this is what we're going to do here. Now let's go take a look at that node table there. So we'll grab our node table here and open that up, and we can see this is the one we just created, and we've got our pass node and fail node for this particular, whatever the in a particular row is. And we've also got that condition ID there. And so we want to make sure we get the right field names. So we've got pass node ID and fail node ID there. That's what we want to see, and that's what we're going to grab depending on what we get back from our condition is true. And so we'll start with the fail. So we'll say our node 2 is equal to the fail node. So if the condition fails, it's going to equal the fail node ID, whatever that happens to be in that table. And we're going to add on our NZ or NZ function depending on where you live. The NZ function is going to give us a value regardless of whether that field is null or not. So if it's null, we're going to get a -1, which is going to say stop processing. But if it has a value in there, then it's going to return that value. So that's a nice little safeguard you can put on there. It'll make things run a little bit more smoothly. So there we go. We've got our field value for the fail. We're loading it into that node 2 variable, and that variable is going to be passed back to as the value of do node whenever we call do node. Now, for the condition is true, if we get a true answer or it evaluates to true, that's where we're going to do those actions that we've been preparing in the previous episodes. And so the first thing we'll do, we're going to do prompts for the node that we're working on. And then the second thing we'll do is do the actions for the node that we're working on. And then we're going to go to the node for the pass node ID basically. And so we're going to load that node 2 variable with the pass node after we do prompts and actions. And so there's our field value for the pass node. If it's null, we're going to get a -1, and that's going to be loaded into our variable and then returned as the value of this function. So nice and easy. We get the integer value back from our function exactly the way that we would like. We can hit save on that, and we'll save our objects. And I think our do node function is ready to go here. So that's going to return that long integer. That's what we want, and it's going to get that value from that variable there. The variable is set to -1 at the very beginning of the procedure, and through all of this processing here, it might get the pass node or the fail node, depending on whether the condition was true. We've accounted for null values, and we're returning that integer, and that is exactly what we want to see. We're exiting out of the function after that, and if we get an error, well, we've explained the error handling already, and that is super handy, and we're good to go here. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to do our do nodes subroutine, and now that's going to be receiving a set integer value, which is really just basically saying which context do you want to run. And so we might have a context for price change, and we have another context for something else, and this is going to allow us to specify that at the very start of our processing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set up a node. We want to know which node is associated with the set that has been specified as the long integer there. And so we can do that very easily by just using a DLOOKUP. No big record sets in this procedure. We are just going to use it. We're going to use a DLOOKUP for our node. So we'll go ahead and grab that. So we'll say our node is equal to DLOOKUP, and we'll get that node ID from ADI set, where the set ID is equal to set ID. And so we'll grab that. So that's the set name and the ID. The set name is the friendly name. That's what we're going to be putting in forms later. So the users will choose something like, price change check. That's what they'll be selecting in a form. But we're going to be working with the integers right now, and so we'll say get that node ID from ADI set where the set ID is equal to the set integer there. And then once we have our starting node, What are we going to do? Well, we're going to run a loop. And the loop is going to execute until we get a -1 on our return node there. And that's going to be super handy, and that's what we want to see. So we're going to say do until the node is equal to -1. We don't know when it's going to end. We should fix that next there. It's actually a do loop, not a do next. There's no such thing as do next loop. So there we go. We can go do until node equals -1, and we are good to go. So now we've got that loop there, and that's going to loop through and get, it's going to evaluate and get the next node and evaluate and get the next node until it runs out of nodes to look at. And so let's take a look at our conditions here. So let's grab a condition. This is the Jim signing in condition. You can see it is an expression, and the fizzer check is also an expression. Now that null expression there is actually quite interesting. You may not be able to use isNull, the isNull function. You have to put not equal to null when you're using eval. And if you run into that problem, let me know if you try to use isNull and it doesn't work for you. But that is our condition for our condition lookup. And there we go. We've got our condition. Now our current test node, it is outputting into our log file, so be aware of that. We've got a batch start and batch complete. So this is some logic that we already built in our previous episode where it was writing to a log file, and we're going to use that log file quite extensively over the next few episodes. Make sure you pay attention to that. And here is our actions. And the actions are where we can actually specify to, fill the log file or run a batch procedure or whatever. That is one of the tables that we built, and you can see those are all attached to node 0. And there we go. So we've got our actions and we've got our prompts, and this is the prompts that we built in episode 3. And this is where we can ask the user some context, yes, no. They can put in a value and record that for some other process, and that's what we want to do there. And so we're going to build our first node now. We'll just call it test node for now. That would be the friendly name for the node. We'll give much better descriptive names once we start using a form, because the friendly name will appear in a drop down. But for now, let's just work with the tables. We've got condition 2, and if I go to the condition table, that is Jim is signing in. So we've got an expression for that's going to evaluate to true or false. That expression is outside of the VBA editor, and it's outside of Access, and we're just executing it using eval. And that's what we want to do there. So we'll just start there. We've got our test node, and we can go ahead and build our second node here. We'll just call it test node 2 for now. And that one is going to use the condition ID 1, which is the check to see whether or not we're still selling purple fizzer candy or not. And so we've started with 2 conditions just to demonstrate here. And if we pass on the first node, then we're going to go to the second node. And if we fail, then we're going to end, we're going to terminate, which means if on the first node, if Jim is logged in, then we're going to continue processing into the second node. And then the second node will check, are we still selling purple fizzers? And if it's true, then we're going to terminate, and if it's false, we'll also terminate. And so that's what the -1s mean there. And so those conditions are pretty simple. All we're going to do is we're going to process a second condition if Jim is logged in. And so now we can go to our prompts, and we're going to grab our prompts from our previous episode, and now we'll apply those to the node 1. And so these are going to be executed if Jim is logged into the system. And of course, we not only have prompts, but we also have actions. And the actions we're also going to grab from node 0. So now we're going to grab everything that was happening in our previous episode. We're going to attach that to our first node, and that's going to allow us to have actions. And you can see here that the actions that are happening is we're doing a log entry for a batch was kicked off, and then we're going to do the big batch procedure as action number 2, and action order 3 is log entry. And then we give a message box at the end there, and that's what we want to see for that first node, if in fact it is Jim that is hitting the start shift button. And for our second node, we'll go ahead and we'll add an action for our node number 2 there, just so that we have something happening on both of our nodes. And so we're going to grab that message box OK function, and we are going to put that into a new row here, and we are going to apply that to node ID number 2. And so this will be action ID 5, which is auto-generated, and we're going to create the action order as number 1. You can run as many actions as you want on any node, and we'll put that message box OK in there. And we are going to populate that with some text here. There we go. We can put in some title for our second node. We'll just say second node, and then we'll say the condition for the second node evaluated to true. And I think that will be enough for showing how the actions work and that we actually did process to node number 2. As our very, very simple example. You can see we're starting to build more and more complex examples. The very first one was a very simple node with just a few things in it, and now we're starting to navigate to other nodes. And those other nodes can also have actions or prompts and things like that in it. So let's pull up our code editor here. I want to draw your attention to our message box OK function. That's where that comes from. And if you saw the my big batch procedure, that is also in here. So that could be a 1,000-line procedure doing a whole bunch of things, and we've just done one line and called it true. But you get the idea. They all return Boolean true false, and that is one of the design considerations of the ADI framework. So that we can use those functions inside of the eval function, and it sort of makes everything nice and sort of standardized and easy to work with. So there we go. That's our message box OK in our actions. And so if we run our procedure, or we evaluate our nodes and go to node number 2 and it's a true, we should get that pop-up message box as an action. And so we'll do a view immediate window. You can also hit Control G on your keyboard, and let's just see what we get here if we type in do nodes, and we'll put in the set number as 1, and we'll hit enter on that, and let's see what happens here. Oh, it looks like I broke it already. Oh, of course, yeah, because we don't have our application open. So that's something you need to be aware of. So you see that message box that came up. That's a nice user-friendly message box. And because we put the error handling on it, it closed our record sets after. And so what we can do is we can go and open our form. Let's go find our form here. Let's double click on that shift form there. And that has a couple of unbound fields on it. We're just going to type in our worker, and we'll see how that works. So we're putting Jim in there. Now Jim is part of the first condition, if you remember. And if I click this start shift button, it doesn't really do anything. And we want to change that. We want to hook up our button, and we'll do that here in a couple of minutes. But first, let's give our code a little bit of a test. Let's do that immediate window from the view menu, or you can hit Control G, and we'll go do nodes 1, and we'll hit enter on that and see what we get. So there we go. We've kicked off our ADI framework on set number 1. It is doing the prompts and actions for the first node. I can type in some stuff here, and that was one of the entry inputs that we included. And then we had a question, are you feeling great today? And then the last thing for node 1 was your batch procedure was completed, have a nice day. But now you'll see our second node is now evaluating, and it says the condition for the second node evaluated to true. And the condition was, are we still selling purple fizzers in the candy table? And the answer to that is yes. And so we got the prompts and actions for that case. And so you can see the ADI framework in action there. And there we go. We can use that. So let's go ahead and take a look at our log. We should see a couple of new entries, and we can see those here. Batch procedure was started, batch completed, batch procedure was completed, and that's what we wanted to see there. Now our candy table, if we look at that one, the candy table is looking for purple fizzers if we still have that in our list. And if it's true, we get the value for the second node, or we get the processing for the second node. And if that node evaluates to true, well, of course, we get our prompts and actions, just like you see here. Now, this start shift button, we want to hook up our ADI framework to use that. And so let's right click on our form, go to design view, or you can choose it from the menu up above. And we'll look at that button, we'll right click and go properties, and then we'll grab the event tab here. And the event tab has what we're looking for, which is the on click event. We're going to click on that ellipsis, and then we'll double click on the code builder or select and go OK. And we are good to go. Now that's going to start a new sheet. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy that code from the immediate window, and we can just stick it right into the buttons procedure here. And that's exactly what we want to see there. We've got our click procedure, and we are doing the nodes for set number 1. We hit the save button or Control S, and you'll be able to save your objects. And now we can go ahead and right click on our form and go to form view, and you can see we've still got Jim in there. Since we did not close our form, it still has the value in our unbound text box, but we can hit the start shift button, and that's going to kick off our ADI framework, which is going to have a whole bunch of good stuff in there. So now it's going to say, please enter some stuff. This is starting to get real. We can hit OK, and you can say, oh, maybe I don't feel great today. It says your batch procedure was completed. Have a nice day. And then you go OK, and then it says, oh, the condition for the second node evaluated to true, which means that the node 1 went to node 2, which is exactly what we want to see. And so now we can look at our answers, and this is a table we have not looked at much today, but you can see that we have answers to the prompts in here, and that is a history of the the user context and what they answered. And so that's something that we can use quite a bit. And also the log table, we can see the results of hitting the start shift button. There was a batch procedure that if Jim is working, that batch procedure has to run, and that's what happens when Jim says start shift, or when he clicks on start shift. This is a very simple example. So if I type in Mary and I click on start shift, well, that doesn't do anything, because the first condition, the user logging in is Jim, or the user on the screen is Jim, is false, and so that results in a terminated condition, or -1, and we can look at that condition here. So Jim is signing in, which is forms shift form txt worker equals Jim. That is a expression that evaluates to false in ADI programming. So you really do need to wrap your head around the fact that all of your conditions evaluate to true or false, and that is part of what makes this nice and easy to use. So condition 1 says, are we still selling purple fizzers? And we're doing a D lookup, and we're saying if that's not equal to null, then it's true. Basically, if you find it in the table, then we are selling it. If not, then we're not selling it. So let's go and delete it from the table. We're going to delete the purple fizzers from our table. So now that is going to evaluate to false. And so now we're not selling purple fizzers. We'll put Jim in as our worker. And now that's going to go through the first set of actions and prompts in node 1. And it'll, just like usual, Jim is clicking start. It's going to, ask him for some information, and it's going to kick off that procedure in the background. Gives a message saying the procedure was completed, the batch is completed. And now we don't get anything after, because we don't sell purple fizzers anymore. And that's exactly what we want to see there. Now we could go ahead and we could do, say, a purple fizzers warning message, or purple fizzers, something along those lines, by creating another node and attach that node to the failure on node 2, and that might actually be handy as well. And this would be a good use case for simply using the true pass-through on our logic. So we know from test node 2, if it is a false, that one checks to see whether we sell purple fizzers or not. If we get a no for that, then we can go ahead and do some alternate processing, and we might want to just give some kind of message or something. And so for that case, this is a good use case for the condition number 3 here, or if you have a different number for yours, but basically the condition where we say true is true, and we're just going to do the prompts and actions that are attached to the true branch. And so for this node, we would choose condition number 3, and we could say if it passes or fails, we don't really care. We're going to put -1 for both of those, so it's going to terminate after this node anyway, but we're going to do condition number 3. But what that does is, because it's a true, it's always true for the condition 3, then we can use this kind of node in order to just basically do some prompts or do some actions or both. And it allows us that flexibility that we can just say, hey, it's just true. Just do this stuff. And so we know already that purple fizzers is not sold on this branch, and so we can go ahead and say, we're not selling purple fizzers. You can see that it's action order number 1, and it is just a message box OK, and this is attached to node number 3, and our title will be sold items, and our sort of message will be purple fizzers are no longer sold, so stop trying to sell purple fizzers. We'll put a please in there. And so that's going to give us the ability to just use a true outcome in order to do some stuff when we don't really need to. We already know what the context is. We just want to do some stuff. And so that's going to allow us to do that. And that is super handy. And so there we go. We're working on node number 3. So if I close the action table, now we have an action. And we're going to go ahead and put node number 3 in our node under the fail, because now we have a fail node to go to for node number 2. And if that one fails, it's going to go to node number 3. And so now we can go ahead, and we've got Jim in there. We can hit start shift, and it goes through. It says, oh, it is Jim, so we're going to run a batch, and he has to enter some stuff, and selling some fizzers today, maybe we'll do something like that. And he really wants to sell the fizzers, but your batch was completed. But now it says, it went to that third node. It said purple fizzers are no longer sold, so stop trying to get orders for those. And that is all based off of that sort of dynamic context awareness. We know who's logged in. We know if we sell it or not. But maybe we want to do something like make Jim agree that, he needs to, that he can't try to sell purple fizzers. Now, this is going to be an example of a loop where we have loopback capability, which is very different from a decision tree that does not have this capability without becoming extraordinarily huge and cumbersome in managing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make a new function. So we're going to start calling these functions. These will be like secondary functions. And in our next episode, I'm going to move all of these to another module that's unrelated to the nodes and the actions and stuff. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a function called last yes, no was a yes. We'll just do this as an example. Now remember, if we make a function to use with our ADI system, it has to be a Boolean, yes, no. And so we're going to make a new function, and it's going to look at something, and it's going to pass back a true or false. And so we're going to pass back true or false whether the user answered the last question as a yes. And so if the last question is yes in that answers table for that user, then this will evaluate to a true. And so that's what we want to see here. So here's the answer table. So this could be all different users in here. We've only got one user called user right now. And what we're going to do is we're going to say the last answer from this user. If it's a yes, then this ADI function will return true. Otherwise, it's going to return a false. So let's go and program that, and we can go ahead and do that now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need is we're going to need a Boolean variable that we're going to pass back out of our function as a true or false. And so we'll put a yes variable there. We'll say Boolean yes as Boolean, and we're going to use a return value as a variant because we're going to use some delookups and stuff here. And we can go ahead and set our Boolean yes equal to false to start with. So it's going to be false unless we set it to yes. And then at the end of our function, we can say, yes, last yes, no was yes is equal to whatever our Boolean variable is in our function here. And so we're going to find that out by doing a little bit of lookup work here. And so let's use the dmax function to get the last answer ID for that user. And so that'll make it nice and easy. We'll say get the last answer ID from ADI answer where the username is equal to user. Now, as I mentioned in a previous episode, every application seems to do their user handling differently, and I'm sure your applications are no different. So in this case, I have the user loaded into the table here, but what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that we're getting that from somewhere. You guys can grab it from however you guys do it, but there's our user there, and that's how we're going to use it for our example here today. So now we can go ahead and do an if-then statement. We can say, if the last return value was, a yes, then we can return true, otherwise false. But in order to do that, of course, we need to get that return value. We've got our maximum ID, so that's the last created ID. Since we're using an auto number, those are in sequence. And so we're going to say if that's not, a null value, then we can go ahead and we're going to make a new variable called answer as a long integer there. And we'll say the answer, long answer there is equal to convert to long of our variant return value there. And so Once we've got our answer in there, then we can do a DLOOKUP and we can actually just get the answer from that. And so we're going to do a DLOOKUP for the answer, which is the answer field in ADI answer, where the answer ID is equal to that last answer ID there. And then we can say, if return value is equal to yes, then we can just do a one-liner here and say Boolean yes is equal to true, because we already know that it's false that we set originally, and now we're changing that to true. So there we go. We've got a nice little function. This is an ADI function that we could use over and over and over again through your code, or not your code, through your ADI framework whenever you need to look up what the last answer was. And if the last answer was yes or not, then you can use that here. And so we can test that out. We can say last yes, no was yes, and then we can use we need a question mark there. Since we're in the immediate window, we're asking for the value of a function. And so we can just put the empty brackets and we hit go, and we get a true, which is awesome. That's what we want to see, since the last value that this person answered was a yes in the last question that they answered. So this applies to, now we're really operating in context, because we are asking for the last answer they gave. Is it yes or not? And so it could be yes, no. If you put it out of order and you use this out of order, then of course it's always going to be no, because maybe they answered something different to an input question. They put in something else. So you need to make sure that you pay attention to how you create those. And then the next thing we can do is we can go to our condition table. Now we're going to use that function that we just created. We're going to stick that into our conditions table, so that now our super users, or our users that we're doing knowledge harvesting with, they can choose this from a list, and they can always choose from a drop down where it says last answer was yes, and they can use that in their logic. And so for our condition, we're just going to stick in our function name, which is last yes, no was yes, and that's all we need to do. Now we have a condition that checks if the last answer was yes, and that makes it very nice and easy to use. So now we can go to our node, and we can double click on that, and we can add a new check, or we can add a new node here. And we can call this node something very specific if we want. We can say, Jim must confirm, or something like that. We're going to make Jim say yes, otherwise he's going to be stuck in an endless loop. And this is one of the big differences, as I mentioned, from decision trees, is that the processing changes according to the context, or according to information that's gathered along the way during processing. And so in this case, if we have a pass for our condition, then we're going to terminate with -1. And if we fail, we're going to go back to number 3. And here's number 3, and it's going to give that same message again saying, hey, we don't sell purple fizzers anymore. And then that's going to redirect them back one link in the chain, I guess you'd call it, or back up. Now this is only going back one step, but you could go to any step further back in the chain, or you could go to a new step that does something different. Now in this case, we're just going back one step, where we're going back to node number 3, and we're going to make him answer it again over and over until he says yes. So we've got a prompt here. And what we're going to do with the prompt is we're going to make a new prompt, and we're going to make it a yes/no prompt. And we're going to assign it to node ID 3. And we're going to make it the first order on node ID 3. And it's going to be a yes/no prompt. And it says no fizzers okay in the caption. And then, make sure that you don't sell those okay. And that'll be a yes/no. And then from there, what we can do is, now that we've got a prompt, then we can use that prompt over and over, or we can navigate back over it again. And so, indicate yes and that you understand, or something like that. This is just an example of how to create a loop until a certain outcome happens. So there we go. This is prompt ID 4 for node ID 3, and we've got an action that happens as well. We're going to go ahead and we're going to delete that action that's already attached to node 3. So we're going to delete that because that was an OK only box. So we're going to delete that. So now we've got a new yes no prompt on node 3 as opposed to an action on node 3. And so here we go. Now we've got that in there on our node. There's our node there. Purple fizzers no longer sold. So that is a check. And then this node number 4 just checks to see if the answer on node 3 was yes or no. And so we can check that. We've got that in our condition, and now we should be able to use that. We can say yes to saving. There's our condition. Condition number 5, which was last yes no was yes, and we can use that here in order to do some processing. So there we go. We can double click on our nodes. We're going to change that to a 5 for the condition ID for node 4. I made a mistake there, and we're going to put node 4 as a new pass node ID for node ID 3, which used to terminate on pass, but now we're going to go to node number 4. So there we go. We can go back to our form and click Start Shift, and it says, is this prompt working? We can say yes, and we can gonna sell fizzers because he really wants to sell some fizzers. And then I think he's feeling great today. And it says, hey, your batch procedure was completed for Jim. And you go, okay, but then now it goes into our logic that says, hey, we don't have any fizzers left. Make sure you don't sell those. Click yes if you understand. And if he clicks no, it goes back up into the tree and it makes him answer that question. And so there you have it. We have all of our logic working for our ADI nodes. That is one of the biggest logic pieces we're going to do. But you guys are probably wondering, well, isn't it easier somehow to put all of this data together using forms? And you are 100% correct. We're going to go ahead in our next few episodes and we're going to start building forms so that we can make this data entry much easier. And we're also going to take a look at doing some more of the standard ADI functions that are very, very useful for you to use. Make sure to stay tuned because this series is just getting started. Interested in time collection for your staff out in the field? Make sure to check out my Bill Zone system. The link is in the description.